years ago when we were studying Viking Age history and archaeology at the University of Nottingham. We're very lucky. Since then we've moved upwards. If you want to work in the field of Vikings, there's really only one city that you get to live in the UK. So we moved up here a while ago. We've done the obligatory stint at the Jorvik Centre. Now we work together, travelling around the country, bringing Vikings into schools and museums and occasionally churches, whether or not they like it. So we're going to give you a bit of a taste for Viking Age combat. Although Viking Age combat and Anglo-Saxon combat, and to be honest, Roman and Norman and all sorts of combat in this period, are quite difficult to tell apart. Lots of people ask the difference between Vikings and Saxons, and frankly, there really aren't any. The only real difference from my perspective between a Viking-Saxon and a Viking fighting and a Saxon fighting is the Saxon's almost always going to be the one facing forwards. The reason the Vikings are hard to beat in battle isn't because they're actually better at fighting than anybody else, it's they're much faster at running away, right? That's why they're hard to deal with. But we don't have space to run away this evening, so let's go through a few of the basics and the most common, the most simple, the most obvious bits of equipment that everybody's going to be carrying on the field. Any guesses what the most common piece of gear is? It ain't one of these. Shields, yeah, absolutely. There is not going to be a single warrior on the field without one of these, on the basis that not very many people have one of these, right? These are really, really expensive. The amount of time it would take. We've got somebody who can tell us how much time it takes to make a coat of mail, because there's a reason Adam's not wearing his this evening, is because he hasn't finished it yet. How long did it take you?
I've been working on and off for years.
Yeah,
so
literally
I
as long as I've known.
When I finished it, I'll give you an idea.
Yeah, exactly. So these are immensely labour intensive, but more than the cost of labour, which in the Viking Age is relatively cheap. Of course, this is a society that owns quite a lot of people, so labour isn't the most expensive thing, but metal's really, really expensive. You'll have seen in the cabinets, if you've had a look around in the cabinets, not very many objects made of metal are big. That's because the smelting process is really, really complicated. It takes a long time. Producing this much metal, this is worth like 100 people, right? It's just really, really valuable. So everybody is carrying shields. Shields are good, shields are useful, shields keep you alive. They're better at it when you're working in concert. Shall we give a bit of a demonstration about how these people fight when they're together? So much of the time, when you're fighting together, you'll be fighting in what everybody knows they're called a
Shield wall.
Shield wall, right? Ready? So these shields are going to be locked together. They're going to overlap. And if we about face, do you want to be the inside and I'll be the outside? Well, about face, you can see that I'm holding the back of my colleague's shield with my elbow. If Ingar, were to come on over and give the centre of our shield a bit of a kick, this will demonstrate how solid this line is, right? So we are making sure that both of us stay alive by locking ourselves in front. The difficulty here is it doesn't give us very many opportunities to swing. This is a good thing in battle. If you imagine in battle, everybody's standing like this and everybody's going hell for leather, trying as hard as they can to kill all of the people opposite them, how many survivors in a battle are there going to be? One, right? There can only be one bloke left at the end. It's a nice thing to know about battles in the Viking Age and lots of other periods. People are trying quite hard not to kill each other. It's encouraging, right? If you are trying to kill each other, no, let's start with the boring stuff. These are too fun. Let's start with the really boring stuff. Okay. If you're gonna try to kill each other, the simplest, easiest weapon to work with is a long pointy stick, right? Spears are really, really common in the Viking Age because they're mainly made out of, and wood is, and metal is. Right, straightforward, right? If I've got 100 blokes and I need to spam them at Anglo-Saxons, they're all going to be carrying these. The disadvantage when you're fighting on your own with a spear, well, the length starts off as an advantage, suddenly it's not much of an advantage anymore, right? All my colleague, or in this case my opponent, needs to do, I'll actually try this time, shall I? Sorry, there we go, I'm dead, right? All it takes is one displacement of the tip of the weapon. There's only one bit that can hurt him, and it's this bit here. I might try swinging the spear like this, but once again, very, very difficult for me not to die. So, spears aren't a great weapon when you're fighting on your own. And since there are only two of us, let's get rid of spears, because they're really boring. I told you they're boring. This is unexciting. But I might still not be the wealthiest man on the battlefield. So we're going to apply a similar principle, fighting with axes. Axes, once again, almost all wood, not very much metal. You can see an original example of an axe that looks a bit like that one in the cabinets here. And these are a little bit more like it. You can put these to work. me. The difficulty you might see with axes is they're very tip heavy. You can see us struggling to really commit to making use of this weapon properly because all of the weight is at the tip. Now, people will tell you lots and lots of things about axes in the Viking Age. Lots of people are compelled that Vikings threw axes at each other. Well, now I'm dead, right? So you probably actually needed that. You probably aren't throwing your axes at each other. There are much better weapons to throw: javelins, darts, lots of things you can hurl them at each other. Axes, they're a bit cumbersome for it. Lots of people are also compelled to tell you that an axe is used for hooking shields, pulling them out the way. And the bloke standing behind me with a spear might get the job done. Now, this is true, of course, but if I'm aiming for my opponent's shield, really that's what the shield is for, and that's what he wants me to do. I might pull it out of the way, but he's just going to clonk me on the noggin while I'm doing it, right? So you've got to be really, really quick. There is a problem with people's identification of axes and the ways you see people using them in this kind of a context. Because we do this, actually we don't do it nearly as often as we used to because we're not quite as young as we used to be, but we do this more often than a Viking would, right? How many battles does a medieval reenactor fight over a summer? 2 every other weekend, right? Loads and loads and loads of battles. Your average reenactor will have more battle experience than an actual Viking, right? An actual Viking might fight 2 battles in their lifetime, and the axe only needs to survive 1 of them. Now, these short weapons aren't very competitive, right? They're a bit too short. You'll have seen every time I get past my opponent's shield, I'm out of range to strike. These short axes are easier for people to move around, to carry, to work with, but we think original axes might have been quite a lot longer. We also think their hafts were thinner. This cuts down on weight. That's great. And when they're longer, it means you can hit them further away. That's brilliant. But the counter is, it means it's more tip heavy and it's slower to return, right? This is a problem. These axes, they need to be nice and thick, they need to be durable because they need, for us, to survive lots of battles. But a Viking's axe only really needs to work once. And I think the way a Viking's axe works is completely differently from hacking back this way through the shield. Sure thing, axes are for cutting wood. You might want to splinter your opponent's shield apart, but if you've got a great big wood-splitting axe, it's going to take you all day to bring it to bear once, right? It's no good at all, your opponent's just going to kill you. And frankly, it makes you look like an absolute mug, doesn't it? Standing in the you're trying, clearly not trying. So this is no good at all. I think the way axes were traditionally used, given that we know from some archaeological findings in Denmark that the handles on them are about twice as long, is for making people not want to kill you. Remember what I said earlier on? The majority of the time these people aren't trying to kill each other. It's not something these people are particularly interested in. Killing people is, typically speaking, quite horrible. People really, really don't like stabbing each other. You can understand why. The idea of pushing a knife or a sword through somebody else's body, it's not appealing, much nicer to cut. But even then, I really don't want to be looking into this guy's eyes as I've sunk an axe into his collarbone and he's, squealing and thrashing around. And even worse than that, if I've sunk my axe into this guy's collarbone, sorry, hit quite hard there, the bloke standing behind him is going to sink his axe into me, right? And when my axe is buried inside him, it's not coming back out again. So we have a problem. I think axes are used less as a weapon and more of a deterrent. If this is twice as long, and I'm holding it right up here in the air, this is what, when we teach combat together to groups of adults, we call the, I won't tell you what we usually call this guard because there are children in the room, we call it the go away guard, right? When you're holding a very, very long piece of metal very high in the air, this guy is suddenly extremely disinclined to step into this area here, right? If this is twice as long, that axe is going to be moving, oh, my geometry's bad, very, very quickly. I don't know how long it'll be moving, but by the time it meets that helmet or no, it's going to do the job, right? It's a one-hit wonder. There's no way that axe halved, about an inch thick, isn't breaking. But the thing is, it's like a nuke. I don't actually want to use it. The idea isn't to swing it at the guy. The idea is to make sure he doesn't step off. Now, this fits into our understanding of these battles. These are guys trying to take the field. You don't want to kill everybody opposite. You especially don't want to commit to a blow that's going to get your fingers smashed in by somebody else's axe or whatever it is. You're trying to take the field by pushing people around. So this is battlefield combat. It's about posturing, it's about making use of intimidating weapons and tactics, it's about creating a lot of noise, sometimes it's about killing, mainly it's about not dying. And that's how we understand these people fighting, right? But when people are fighting in a different context, that of the duel, suddenly the pressure's on, right? So if we're both fighting over a lady or land or whatever it might be, it's fairly unlikely that we're going to be using axes, because they're not very glamorous weapons. They're not particularly exciting. They make a bit of noise when you use them. But the chances are we're going to be fighting with a weapon with a bit of status. So should we get the swords out? Yeah, it's better. Now these have got a bit more, well, they enable you to fight with a bit more finesse. But what the sword tells you, of course, is the person using it is likely to have finesse. It's entirely made out of metal, usually steel, sometimes iron. We do have reports in sagas and other stories of the period of swords bending when you hit people. And, oh, sorry chap, your sword seems to be a bit bent. Do you need a minute? Oh, thank you very much. Straighten the sword back out again, carry on fighting. Most of the time that's a bit embarrassing, so most swords are going to be made out of reasonable metal. And if you see somebody carrying one of these, it suggests that they're probably not a, we've got children in the audience, something munching peasant, right? They're more likely to be competent, land-owning, more likely to be a trained fighter. And this is what judicial combat may have looked like. Are you okay?
Yes,
Hit him in the fingers. Oh, sorry. Gee. Let's give him a moment. So, lots of big cuts. You get these things moving and you can see we're not just holding our shields statically in front of ourselves. These are not passive defensive tools. They are weapons in their own right. If I'm holding my shield in front of me like this, my opponent is simply going to, well, he's okay, possibly. He might hit the shield with his sword. What I would do if he was holding his shield flat in front of him is move it out the way with the edge of my shield and give him a good thumping, right? These things pivot in the middle. That's good when you're fighting individually because you have this dynamic movement of the weapon. It's not so good when you're fighting in a shield wall, which is why you have to lock the other guy's shield in with your elbow so it doesn't wobble around, right? Bit more? Slippy, slippy, slippy. So you can see the moment when the tip of somebody's sword comes past your shield, you can pass it off. Things are away. But the moment when the butt of his sword has passed my shield, I'm done for. He can move it in any direction he wants. Which is why I went, oh, started going backwards. Now, we also know, I'm going to take my lid off for a minute, so I can't see a thing. We also know that there's a problem in Iceland where most of the written material we have about life in the Viking Age comes from. That too many people are dueling. We have moments in sagas where people are wiping out entire families, judicial duels, carrying away generations of young men. People are panicking that all of the poets are also the fighters, and if the poets all kill each other, there'll be no blooming poetry, and there's nothing else to do in Scandinavia or Neden. So Scandinavians are passing laws to prohibit dueling, but they're also encouraging duels to work in ways that discourage people from dying, which is really good. So we see a phenomenon where people are encouraged to strike each other's shields instead of their swords and their heads. This is sensible, right? If you're aiming for, oh, I really do want to put it back on again, don't I? If you're aiming for shields, that's great because shields are cheap and young noblemen aren't cheap, right? So we see shields being cut through at an incredible rate. These shields do have some advantages. As I say, their lightness, or relative lightness, I suppose, does mean they're quite dynamic, but there are issues with them. We see in sagas loads and loads of leg hits, right? This nice round shape, when you don't have a big row of people all protecting each other. When you're standing in a shield wall, you can't really hit the other guy in the leg because you've got to lean all the way down like this, right? When you're fighting in a duel, we see leg shots happening absolutely all the time. Now this takes place for a few reasons. One, this is a very, very organic way of cutting. We see in medieval depictions of combat all the time, people always cut from up high to down low. And this is hard to tell where a weapon is going to go when it starts up high. You might be aiming for a head, you might be aiming for a shoulder, you might be aiming for a leg, and it all comes from exactly the same place. So it's very natural, it's very organic. The shields encourage this kind of striking, but there's one more problem which I've noticed when wearing this kind of helmet in particular, which you can see my friend isn't wearing, which is the very moment when my opponent starts that cut from up high, I can see where it's going until about that moment there, when it disappears because of this spectacle. And that's the moment where I really sort of need to work out if he's about to hit my shoulder or my head or my leg or whatever it is. So we see a phenomenon where these shields encourage a certain amount of leg striking, and these helmets discourage you from noticing a certain amount of leg striking. So I'm going to pop this one off and stick on the sort of the inheritor to that kind of helmet, which trundles along during the slightly later Anglo sort of Norman period. So this is the kind of helmet that's going to be very, very popular during the Battle of Hastings era. These helmets are more or less gone by that time, and I think it's because there are too many leg hits. Now I'm happy to sacrifice that certain amount of security, although I do have a certain amount of padded cap falling down into my eye. It's very annoying. Thank you very much. You can't really fight if you can't see, although mainly just using this as an excuse for a bit of a breather. Oh, here we go. Now I'll be able to see a lot more of what's going on, which is rather nice. So shall we have? We have one more bout like this, and then I'll talk about some of the other weapons that you might see around the place. Ready? Ooh, big gun. It works, I can see. So, helmets like this are advantageous for a few reasons. Oh, hit you right in the finger. That really hurt. One, you get much better visibility. Two, you can see my previous helmet is shaped like a great big round bowl on the top of my head, right? This has got a rather nice point to it. This isn't just for style, this is a deflection thing. If my opponent's going to clonk me right on the top of the head of the sword, it's more likely to skitter off down onto my armoured shoulders. So that's an advantage. There is a lot of debate in the field of sort of medieval arms and armour about how good helmets were. Do helmets stop blows from swords and axes? Let's do a poll. Do we think they do? Hands up if you reckon swords are, helmets are any good for stopping you get dead in combat. Yeah, a couple of people. It's a genuine question, we're not sure. Hands up, no, if you reckon helmets are probably kind of useless. It wouldn't really explain why people wear them. But we do know from examples, these helmets aren't made out of hardened steel.